They shoved her wheelchair, laughed in her face until the door opened, and every thug in the room froze, because the disabled woman they mocked wasn't alone. She was married to the most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast. And when he saw their hands on her chair, the entire cafe realized something brutal. Someone wasn't walking out of there the same again. If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. The 3 tattooed thugs had made the entire cafe uncomfortable. Customers stared at their plates, and the young waitress looked like she might drop her tray at any moment. Everyone was on edge. Everyone, except for the stunning woman in the wheelchair, sitting calmly in the corner. Her lack of fear was a challenge they couldn't ignore. They saw a disabled woman, an easy target. They had no idea they were about to make the worst mistake of their lives. Her name was Sherry Holmes. She was in her mid-30 seconds, a beautiful Latina with long black hair that fell gracefully over her shoulders and deep brown eyes that seemed to pierce through pretense. She wore a fitted gray tank top and dark jeans. Her body was curvy with strong, toned shoulders and defined arms that told the story of someone who had fought through unimaginable pain. She sat with a powerful, unshakable stillness in her sleek black wheelchair. The cafe had been peaceful before they arrived. Soft jazz played from speakers mounted in the corners. The smell of fresh espresso and warm pastries filled the air. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the large front windows, casting golden rectangles across the wooden floor. It was the kind of place where people came to escape, to find a few moments of quiet in a chaotic world. Then the door burst open. 3 men stomped inside, their presence immediately suffocating the calm atmosphere. The leader was massive, over 6 feet tall, with a shaved head that gleamed under the lights, a thick neck like a tree trunk, and arms covered completely in dark tattoos. Tribal patterns, skulls, flames, all blending together in an intimidating canvas of ink. He wore a black sleeveless vest that showed off his muscular build, and his boots were heavy, the kind that made statements with every step. His 2 companions flanked him like loyal dogs. One was shorter but just as thick, with a scarred face and cold eyes. The other was lean and wiry, with a nervous energy that made him seem unpredictable, dangerous in a different way. All 3 wore the same arrogant expressions, the same swagger that said they'd never been told no in their lives. "Hey!" the leader barked at the waitress, a young woman in her early 20s with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She froze mid-step, her eyes wide. "We want a table, now." "Yes, of course," she stammered, nearly dropping the plates she was carrying. "Right this way." They didn't follow her. Instead, they stood in the middle of the cafe, forcing her to come back to them. The leader pointed at the largest table near the window. "That one. Clear it." There was already a couple sitting there, an older man and woman enjoying their lunch. They looked up in alarm as the thugs approached. "Move," the shorter one said flatly. The couple gathered their things quickly, the woman's hands shaking as she reached for her purse. They left without a word, abandoning half-eaten sandwiches and full coffee cups. No one said anything. No one defended them. The thugs laughed as they sat down, spreading out like they owned the place. Their voices dominated the entire room, crude jokes and loud boasts that made people wince. The leader snapped his fingers at the waitress like she was a dog. "Coffee, black, and make it fast." She nodded quickly, scurrying toward the counter. Her hands trembled as she poured, and she nearly spilled the pot. Another customer, a middle-aged businessman in a gray suit, watched from his table near the back corner. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched around his phone. But he didn't move. He didn't intervene. No one did, except one person wasn't afraid. Sherry Holmes sat at her corner table, a half-empty cup of coffee in front of her, a small plate with the remnants of a croissant beside it. She had been reading something on her phone, but now her attention was on the thugs. Not with fear, not with concern, with the calm, analytical gaze of someone assessing a situation, measuring threats, calculating outcomes. She had seen worse, far worse. The leader noticed her watching. At first he ignored it, too busy enjoying his dominance over the room. But Sherry didn't look away. She didn't flinch when he made eye contact. She didn't lower her gaze like everyone else had. That irritated him. He leaned back in his chair, staring at her openly now, his eyes traveling over her body in a way that made other customers uncomfortable. Sherry didn't react. She simply took another sip of her coffee, her expression unchanging. "You see that?" the leader muttered to his friends, jerking his chin toward Sherry. Girl in the wheelchair thinks she's tough. The wiry one snickered. Maybe she can't see us from down there. They all laughed. A harsh, ugly sound that echoed through the now silent cafe. The leader stood up slowly, deliberately. His boots thudded against the floor as he walked toward Sherry's table, his friends following close behind. Customers held their breath. The waitress froze near the counter, her face pale. The man in the gray suit near the back shifted slightly in his seat, his hand moving subtly to his phone. He pressed a single button, then brought it to his ear, speaking too quietly for anyone else to hear. But Sherry noticed. Just a flicker of her eyes in his direction, a barely perceptible nod. Then she turned her full attention back to the three men now standing over her table, looming like vultures over prey. The leader leaned down, planting both hands on her table, his face inches from hers. "You look awful confident," he said, his breath hot and sour. "For someone who can't even stand up." Sherry met his gaze without blinking, her brown eyes hard as stone. "You should walk away," she said quietly, "while you still can." The leader's face twisted into an ugly sneer. Sherry's warning hadn't intimidated him, it had insulted him. His friends moved closer, forming a half circle around her wheelchair, boxing her in against the corner wall. The cafe felt smaller now, suffocating, as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. "Walk away?" the leader repeated, his voice dripping with mockery. "You giving me orders now, sweetheart?" Sherry said nothing. She simply held his gaze, her expression carved from marble. That silence was louder than any scream, more cutting than any insult. It said she wasn't impressed. It said she'd seen real monsters before, and he wasn't one of them. The shorter thug with the scarred face laughed nervously, sensing something off but too stupid to understand what. He reached out and tapped the armrest of Sherry's wheelchair with his knuckles, the sound sharp and disrespectful. "Nice ride," he said. "What happened? Boyfriend dump you after you got broken?" The wiry one joined in, circling around to Sherry's side. "Maybe she fell off a stripper pole or something. Look at that body, definitely wasn't always sitting down." Their laughter was cruel, designed to humiliate, to break her down. They expected tears. They expected her to beg. They expected her to shrink. Instead, Sherry took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee, set the cup down with perfect control, and folded her hands in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was calm, almost gentle. That made it terrifying. "You're making a mistake." The leader's eyes narrowed. He grabbed the handles of her wheelchair, actually put his hands on them, and leaned down until his face was just inches from hers. "The only mistake," he growled, "is you thinking you can talk to me like that. You're nothing. You're broken. You can't even run away from me." Sherry's jaw tightened slightly, but her eyes never wavered. Inside, her mind was working like a tactical computer. She counted the distance between each thug. She noted the positions of the exits. She calculated how many seconds it would take for the man in the back, one of Ronnie's lieutenants. She'd recognized him the moment she walked in, to reach her if things went bad. But she also knew something else, something these idiots would never understand. She didn't need to be rescued. She just needed to keep them here long enough for Ronnie to arrive. And he was already on his way. The leader's grip on her wheelchair handles tightened, his knuckles white. He jerked the chair slightly, trying to unsettle her, trying to prove he had control. "What's the matter?" he taunted. "Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you're finally realizing how much trouble you're in." Sherry felt a familiar sensation rising in her chest, not fear, but something colder. It was the same feeling she'd had 3 years ago, when she heard glass shattering in the middle of the night. The same feeling when she saw armed men pouring into their home. The same feeling when she threw herself in front of Ronnie, taking bullets meant for him. That feeling was survival instinct mixed with absolute fury, but she kept it locked down, controlled, because control was her weapon now. "I'm not in trouble," she said quietly, her voice steady as a blade. "But you are." The wiry thug laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. "Big talk from someone who can't even—" "I earned this chair," Sherry interrupted, her voice cutting through his words like steel. "I earned it, taking bullets for someone I love. I earned it surviving something you couldn't imagine in your worst nightmare." "What have you earned? The ability to scare a teenage waitress?" The leader's face flushed dark red. He wasn't used to defiance, especially not from someone he'd already decided was beneath him. His hand came up, finger pointing in her face. "You got a smart mouth for someone in your position." "My position?" Sherry's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You don't even know what my position is." From across the cafe, the businessman in the gray suit stood up slowly. He didn't approach, didn't make a scene. He simply positioned himself closer to the confrontation, his posture alert, his hand inside his jacket. Several customers noticed him, then looked back at Sherry with sudden confusion. Who was this woman? Why did she seem so calm? Why was that man watching her like a bodyguard watching his principal? The leader finally released Sherry's wheelchair, but only to walk around and crouch down beside her, his face level with hers now, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. I could snap you like a twig. I could tip this chair over right now. I could make you cry in front of all these people. He paused, his eyes roaming over her face. But you're pretty, so maybe I'll be nice. Maybe you apologize real sweet. And we forget this happened. Sherry turned her head slowly to look at him, and for the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Not fear. Not even anger. It was pity. You really don't know who you're talking to, she said softly. Do you? The leader opened his mouth to respond, but Sherry continued, her voice taking on an edge that made even his friends shift uncomfortably. In about 3 minutes, someone is going to walk through that door, and when he does, you're going to wish you'd listened to me. The words hung in the air like a prophecy. The cafe seemed to hold its breath. Even the thugs felt it, a shift in the atmosphere, something dangerous approaching like distant thunder. The leader stood up, trying to reclaim his confidence with a forced laugh. Your boyfriend coming to save you? That's cute. Sherry looked up at him, her brown eyes absolutely fearless. Not my boyfriend, she said quietly. My husband. Across town, in a sleek downtown office above an upscale lounge, Ronnie Holmes sat at the head of a polished oak table. The room was dimly lit, the kind of darkness that felt intentional, atmospheric. Heavy curtains blocked most of the afternoon sun, leaving only thin streams of light cutting through the shadows. The air smelled of expensive cigars and aged whiskey. Ronnie himself was a portrait of controlled power. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with a broad, muscular frame that filled out his black-fitted shirt. His bald head gleamed under the low lights, and his arms, visible where he'd rolled up his sleeves, were covered in elaborate tattoos. Tribal patterns, family crests, symbols that told stories of loyalty, blood, and territory. His face was all hard angles, a strong jaw, intense dark eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. He sat perfectly still, listening to the 2 men across from him, rival territory bosses trying to negotiate a boundary dispute. They spoke with nervous confidence, knowing that Ronnie Holmes didn't negotiate so much as decide. His reputation on the East Coast was legendary. Men feared him. Authorities couldn't touch him, and those who crossed him disappeared. One of the men, a heavy-set Italian with graying hair, leaned forward. Mr. Holmes, we're simply asking for consideration. The docks have been split 3 ways for decades. We're not looking to disrespect your operation. Then don't, Ronnie interrupted, his voice low and calm, but with an edge that could cut glass. The docks belong to me now. That territory was earned through blood. My blood. My men's blood. You want consideration? Consider yourselves lucky I'm letting you keep breathing after your boys tried to move product through my port without permission. The second man, younger with slicked back hair, raised his hands in surrender. That was a misunderstanding. Those guys weren't authorized. I don't care about authorization, Ronnie said, his tone never rising, never showing emotion. That was what made him terrifying. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to threaten. His presence alone was the threat. I care about respect. You come to my territory, you ask. You don't ask, you pay. Simple. The room fell silent. The 2 men exchanged glances, realizing this meeting wasn't a negotiation after all. It was Ronnie Holmes telling them how things were going to be, and their only choice was to accept it or face consequences neither wanted to imagine. Ronnie reached for his glass of whiskey, taking a slow sip, when his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. It was Miguel, one of his most trusted lieutenants. Miguel never called during meetings unless it was critical. Ronnie's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He set down his glass and picked up the phone, pressing it to his ear without excusing himself from the table. Talk, he said simply. Miguel's voice came through low and urgent. Boss, we got a situation. Your wife. She's at that cafe she likes on 7th. 3 guys just cornered her. They're getting physical. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ronnie's entire body went rigid. His free hand, resting on the table, slowly curled into a fist so tight his knuckles turned white. The tattoos on his forearms seemed to darken as his muscles tensed beneath them. His face, already hard, became something carved from stone, ancient, immovable, lethal. Physical, he repeated, his voice deadly quiet. Explain. They're crowding her, boss, mocking her chair. The leader's got his hands on it. She's handling it. She's calm. But, Miguel paused. Boss, she's your wife. I know the rules. I called you immediately. Ronnie closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Behind his eyelids he saw Sherry, not the strong, composed woman she was now, but the woman from 3 years ago, bleeding on their living room floor, her legs shattered from bullets meant for him, her hands still reaching for him, even as she faded in and out of consciousness. He saw her face in the hospital. He saw her tears during physical therapy. He saw every moment of pain she'd endured because she loved him, and now someone was touching her, mocking her, putting their hands on what belonged to him. When Ronnie opened his eyes again, the 2 men across the table actually flinched. They'd never seen that look before. It was beyond anger. It was beyond rage. It was the look of something primal being unleashed. Ronnie stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He didn't even look at the 2 territory bosses as he spoke. We're done here. Take the terms I gave you or don't. I no longer care. Mr. Holmes, the older man started. Leave, Ronnie said, his voice ablade. Now. They didn't argue. They gathered their things and left quickly, practically stumbling over each other to get out. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Ronnie brought the phone back to his ear. Miguel, is anyone else there? Just me, boss. I'm positioned at the back table. They don't know I'm yours. Good. Stay there. Keep eyes on her. I'm coming. Boss, you want me to bring the boys? I can have a team there in... No. Ronnie's voice was ice. This is personal. Nobody touches my wife and walks away. Nobody. He ended the call and moved toward the door, his steps measured, controlled. But inside, something violent was building, a storm that had been held back by civilization and business and strategy. That storm was about to break free. As he walked out of the building toward his car, a black luxury sedan with tinted windows, Ronnie's mind was clear, focused, tactical. He wasn't going to that cafe as a businessman. He wasn't going as a negotiator. He was going as a husband whose wife had been threatened, and God help anyone still standing near her when he arrived. Ronnie slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled into traffic. His hands were steady on the wheel, his face emotionless, but his knuckles were still white from gripping too hard. Nobody touches what's mine, he whispered to himself. The words a promise and a threat rolled into one. The cafe was 12 minutes away. He'd be there in 6. Back at the cafe, the tension had become unbearable. The air felt thick, suffocating, like the moments before a violent storm breaks. Customers sat frozen at their tables, their food forgotten, their conversations abandoned. Everyone could feel it. Something bad was about to happen. They just didn't know to whom. The leader stood directly in front of Sherry now, his massive frame blocking her view of the rest of the cafe. His friends flanked her wheelchair on either side, creating a wall of muscle and menace. They thought they had her trapped. They thought they'd broken her spirit with their words, their mockery, their physical intimidation. They couldn't have been more wrong. Your husband? The leader repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. He glanced at his friends, and they all laughed on cue. That's the best you got? Some imaginary man who's gonna come save you? The wiry thug leaned in from Sherry's left side, his breath smelling of cigarettes and cheap beer. Let me guess he's big and tough and scary, right? And he's gonna make us sorry? He laughed again, the sound grating. Lady, if your husband actually existed, what kind of man lets his crippled wife sit alone in a cafe? Sounds like he abandoned you. Sherry's fingers tightened slightly on the armrest of her wheelchair, but her face remained impassive. She'd learned long ago that showing emotion to predators only encouraged them. She'd learned that lesson in the cartel safe house where Ronnie had once taken her for protection. She'd learned it again the night bullets tore through their home. Control was survival. Calm was power. He didn't abandon me, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the anger building beneath the surface. I told him I wanted coffee alone. He respects me enough to give me space. The leader crouched down again, bringing himself eye level with her. This close, she could see the crude tattoos on his neck, the scar above his left eyebrow, the yellow tint to his teeth. He reached out and actually touched her hair, running a strand between his fingers. Respect, he said mockingly. That's cute. You know what I think? I think there is no husband. I think you're just some lonely... His hand suddenly froze mid-gesture. From across the cafe, Miguel had stood up. The businessman in the gray suit, Ronnie's lieutenant, wasn't flashy about it. He didn't shout or draw a weapon. He simply stood, a adjusted his jacket, and took 3 deliberate steps closer to Sherry's table. His hand remained inside his jacket, resting on something the thugs couldn't see. The movement caught the leader's attention. He straightened up, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Miguel. "You got a problem?" Miguel's face was professionally blank. "Just stretching my legs," but he didn't sit back down. He positioned himself about 15 feet away, close enough to intervene, far enough not to escalate prematurely. His eyes met Sherry's for just a fraction of a second, and she gave him the tiniest shake of her head. "Not yet. Wait." The leader stared at Miguel for a long moment, trying to decide if this random businessman was a threat. Finally, he dismissed him with a snort and turned back to Sherry. "Looks like somebody wants to play hero," he muttered. Then, louder, for the whole cafe to hear. "Anybody else want to defend the cripple?" "No? Didn't think so." The shorter thug with the scarred face kicked one of the wheelchair's footrests, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to jolt Sherry slightly. "What do you need these for, anyway? You got no legs under there or something?" "Broken," Sherry said flatly. "Shattered by bullets, 2 of them, through my spine and left femur." The confession should have sobered them. It should have made them realize they were tormenting a survivor of violence, someone who'd already been through more pain than they could imagine. Instead, it only seemed to embolden them. The wiry one laughed. "Damn, what'd you do? Sleep with somebody's husband?" "No," Sherry said, her voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. "I took bullets meant for my own husband. I saved his life, and if I had to do it again, I would. Because he's worth more than all 3 of you combined." The leader's face darkened. Her defiance, her continued refusal to break, was infuriating him beyond reason. He grabbed both handles of her wheelchair and jerked it forward sharply, pulling her away from the table. "You got a smart mouth," he snarled, his face inches from hers now. "Maybe I need to teach you some manners. Maybe I need to remind you what happens to women who don't know their place." Several customers gasped. The young waitress behind the counter covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. An elderly man at a corner table started to rise, but his wife grabbed his arm, pulling him back down, terrified. Miguel's hand tightened inside his jacket. He calculated the distance, the angles, how fast he could draw his weapon if needed, but he held position. Ronnie had been clear about the rules. Protect Sherry if her life was in danger, but otherwise let him handle it. This was personal for the boss. Sherry felt the wheelchair move beneath her, felt this stranger's hands controlling something that was intimate to her, something that had become part of her body. Rage flashed through her, hot and immediate, but she forced it down, channeled it into cold focus. She looked up at the leader, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the entire cafe. "You want to know what happens to people who threaten me?" She paused, letting the question hang. "Ask him yourself. He'll be here any second." The leader opened his mouth to respond with another mocking comment, but something stopped him. A feeling, maybe. An instinct that even violent men develop when they've survived long enough. The cafe door opened, and Ronnie Holmes walked in. The atmosphere in the cafe changed instantly. It wasn't loud. There was no dramatic crash, no shouting, no announcement, just the quiet sound of the door opening, the soft chime of the bell above it, and then footsteps. Slow, measured, deliberate footsteps that seemed to echo despite the carpeted floor. Every head turned toward the entrance. Ronnie Holmes stood in the doorway, and he didn't need to say a word. His presence alone commanded the room, sucked the oxygen out of the air, made everything else feel small and insignificant by comparison. He was tall, imposing in a way that went beyond physical height. His broad shoulders filled the doorframe, his muscular frame evident even beneath the tailored black suit jacket he wore over a dark-fitted shirt. His bald head caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows, and the tattoos visible on his neck and hands seemed to pulse with barely contained violence. His face was carved from granite, strong jaw, intense dark eyes that immediately locked onto the scene in the corner. Those eyes found Sherry first. For just a fraction of a second, something passed between them. A silent conversation that only people who'd survived hell together could have. Sherry's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Relief, love, and something that might have been vindication. She'd told them he was coming. She'd warned them. They hadn't listened. Ronnie's gaze traveled from his wife to the 3 thugs surrounding her wheelchair. His expression didn't change. He didn't rage or shout. He simply looked at them the way a predator looks at prey that doesn't yet know it's dead. The entire cafe held its breath. The leader still had his hands on Sherry's wheelchair handles. He hadn't released them yet, hadn't processed what was happening. His 2 friends, however, felt it immediately. The wiry one's cocky smirk faltered. The shorter one with the scarred face took an involuntary step backward. Ronnie walked forward. Not rushing, not running, just walking with the kind of terrifying calm that said he was completely in control, completely confident, and completely willing to destroy anything in his path. His footsteps were the only sound in the cafe. Even the soft jazz music playing through the speakers seemed to fade into silence. Customers shrank back in their seats. The young waitress pressed herself against the wall behind the counter. The elderly couple in the corner clutched each other's hands. Miguel, still standing near the back, allowed himself the smallest smile. The boss had arrived. This was over. Ronnie crossed the cafe in what felt like slow motion, his eyes never leaving the three men who had dared to touch his wife. When he was about 10 feet away, he finally spoke. His voice was low, controlled, but it carried through the room like thunder. "Step away from my wife." The words weren't a request. They weren't even really a command. They were a statement of fact, a description of what was about to happen, whether the thugs cooperated or not. The leader finally looked up, finally processed who had just walked in. His hands released Sherry's wheelchair handles as if they'd suddenly become burning hot. He straightened up, trying to reclaim some of his earlier bravado, but his face had gone pale. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried just moments before. Ronnie didn't answer. He simply continued walking forward until he was standing directly behind Sherry's wheelchair. His large hands came to rest on the handles, the same handles the thug had been gripping moments ago. The gesture was possessive, protective, and absolutely unmistakable. This was his wife. This was his territory. This was his line that had been crossed. The wiry thug was the first to truly recognize the danger. His eyes widened as he took in Ronnie's tattoos, specifically the ones visible on his neck and hands. Those weren't random prison ink. Those were symbols. Markers of allegiance. The kind of tattoos that told a story to anyone who knew how to read them. "Oh shit," the wiry one whispered, his face draining of color. That's the Holmes mark." The name hit the room like a bomb. Holmes. Ronnie Holmes. The East Coast legend. The man whose name was whispered in back rooms and dark alleys. The man who controlled territories from Baltimore to Boston. The man who made people disappear so completely their own families stopped looking for them. The leader's swagger evaporated completely. His eyes darted to his friends, then back to Ronnie, then down to Sherry, finally understanding what she'd tried to tell him. This wasn't some random disabled woman sitting alone. This was the wife of one of the most dangerous men on the eastern seaboard, and they'd put their hands on her. Miguel casually walked closer now, no longer hiding his affiliation. He positioned himself to Ronnie's left, blocking one potential exit. Two more men who'd been sitting quietly in opposite corners of the cafe, unnoticed until this moment, stood up and moved toward the front door. They weren't drawing weapons. They didn't need to. Their message was clear. Nobody was leaving until the boss decided they could. Ronnie's hands remained on Sherry's wheelchair handles. He leaned down slightly, his voice softening as he spoke to her, though everyone in the cafe could hear him. "Are you hurt?" "No," Sherry answered calmly. "They were loud, disrespectful, stupid, but I'm fine." "Did they touch you?" "They touched my chair. One of them touched my hair." Ronnie straightened back up, and when he looked at the three thugs again, his eyes had gone completely cold. Not angry anger would have been warmer. This was something else, something ancient and merciless. "You touched my wife," he said quietly. "You mocked her disability. You put your hands on her wheelchair." He paused, letting each word sink in like a death sentence. "Do you understand what you've done?" The leader tried to speak, his voice cracking. "Look, man, we didn't know. You didn't need to know." Ronnie interrupted, his voice still deadly calm. "You just needed to be a decent human being. You just needed to leave a woman alone. But you couldn't do that, could you?" The silence that followed was deafening. The three thugs stood frozen, their earlier bravado replaced by something raw and primal, pure, unfiltered fear. "The kind of fear that comes when you realize you've made a mistake that can't be undone, said words that can't be taken back, crossed a line that has deadly consequences on the other side." The leader's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the comfortable temperature in the cafe. His eyes darted toward the door, calculating escape routes, but Miguel stood there with two other men, all three wearing the same cold, professional expressions. There was no escape. Ronnie's hands remained on Sherry's wheelchair handles, a gesture both tender and territorial. He stood there like a mountain, immovable, ancient, carved from something harder than stone. His presence dominated the entire space, making the cafe feel smaller, the air heavier, the danger more immediate. "I asked you a question," Ronnie said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Do you understand what you've done?" The wiry thug, the one who'd been so quick with cruel jokes minutes earlier, actually trembled. We didn't mean..." "Didn't mean what?" Ronnie interrupted, his tone never rising but somehow becoming more intense. "Didn't mean to mock a disabled woman? Didn't mean to put your hands on someone who couldn't defend herself? Didn't mean to terrorize an entire cafe full of innocent people?" He paused, letting the questions hang like accusations. "Which part didn't you mean?" The shorter one with the scarred face tried to step backward, but one of Ronnie's men had positioned himself there, blocking the path. The thug bumped into him and jumped like he'd touched a live wire. Ronnie's gaze swept over all three of them, reading them like books. He'd dealt with men like this his entire life, bullies who preyed on the weak, cowards who hid their fear behind aggression, small-time criminals who thought violence made them powerful. They disgusted him. "You," Ronnie said, pointing at the leader. "What's your name?" The big man swallowed hard. Tommy. Tommy Riggs." "Tommy Riggs," Ronnie repeated, as if memorizing it. "And you thought it was acceptable to put your hands on my wife's wheelchair? To lean into her face? To mock the injuries she sustained saving my life?" Tommy's face went from pale to gray. "I didn't know." "You keep saying that," Ronnie interrupted, his voice taking on a sharp edge. "Like ignorance is an excuse. Like not knowing who she was made it acceptable to treat her that way." He leaned forward slightly, and Tommy actually flinched. "Let me explain something to you, Tommy Riggs. Even if she wasn't my wife, even if she was just a random woman sitting alone, what you did was unforgivable. You understand that?" Tommy nodded frantically, unable to form words. Ronnie's hands tightened on the wheelchair handles, and for a moment, his controlled facade cracked. Emotion bled through rage, yes, but also something deeper, pain. The memory of almost losing Sherry 3 years ago, the memory of her blood on his hands, the memory of thinking she might die because of him, because she'd loved him enough to take bullets meant for his chest. "This woman," Ronnie said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion, "survived things that would have killed you. She took bullets that were meant for me. She lost the ability to walk, protecting the man she loves. She fought through pain you can't imagine, went through surgeries and physical therapy and more suffering than you'll ever know." His eyes bored into Tommy. "And she did it with more grace and strength than you've shown in your entire pathetic life." The cafe was absolutely silent. Even the background music had stopped. Someone had turned it off. Every customer sat transfixed, watching this scene unfold like a movie they couldn't look away from. The young waitress behind the counter had tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of fear anymore. They were something else. Awe, maybe, or recognition of something profound happening in front of her. Sherry sat perfectly still in her wheelchair, Ronnie's hands protective on the handles behind her. Her expression was calm, but her eyes glistened slightly. Hearing Ronnie defend her, hearing him articulate the pain she'd endured, the sacrifice she'd made, it touched something deep inside her. They didn't talk about that night often. It was too painful, too raw, even after 3 years. But now he was laying it bare for these strangers, these thugs who'd thought she was weak. Ronnie stepped around the wheelchair, positioning himself between Sherry and the 3 men. Up close, the size difference was even more apparent. He towered over them, his muscular frame making them look small despite their earlier intimidation tactics. "You want to know who I am?" Ronnie asked quietly. "My name is Ronnie Holmes. I control everything from the ports to the product pipelines in this city. Politicians know my name. Police commissioners avoid my gaze. Other crime families pay tribute to operate in my territory." He paused. "But none of that matters compared to this. I'm the husband of the woman you just disrespected." The wiry thug made a small whimpering sound. Ronnie took 1 step closer to Tommy, close enough that the bigger man had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. When Ronnie spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but everyone in the cafe heard it clearly. "Did you really think," Ronnie asked, "that a woman like her would be unprotected? Did you really think someone that strong, that beautiful, that courageous, wouldn't have a man willing to burn the world down for her?" Tommy's lips trembled. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, we didn't..." Ronnie's hand shot out, grabbing Tommy by the throat. Not choking him, not yet, but holding him with enough pressure to make breathing difficult. The movement was so fast, so precise, that Tommy didn't even have time to react. Sorry isn't enough, Ronnie said, his voice cold as winter. Sorry doesn't undo what you did. Sorry doesn't erase the disrespect you showed my wife. He released Tommy, who stumbled backward, gasping for air. But, Ronnie continued, you're going to have a chance to make this right. You're going to apologize to her properly. On your knees. Tommy Riggs stood frozen, his hand rubbing his throat where Ronnie's grip had left red marks. The demand hung in the air like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. Apologize. On your knees. To the woman they'd mocked, belittled, thought was defenseless. Tommy stammered, his eyes darting between Ronnie and Sherry. I said I'm sorry. Not to me. Ronnie cut him off, his voice like ice. To her. And not standing up. Like you still have dignity. On. Your. Knees. The cafe watched in absolute silence. This wasn't just about punishment. This was about restoration. About giving back the respect these men had tried to steal. Tommy looked at his friends, desperate for support, but they were useless. The wiry one stared at the floor, and the shorter one with the scarred face had gone so pale he looked like he might pass out. Now, Ronnie said, the single word carrying enough weight to make Tommy's legs buckle. Slowly, humiliatingly, Tommy Riggs lowered himself to his knees in front of Sherry's wheelchair. His hands shook as he placed them on his thighs. He couldn't meet her eyes. Look at her, Ronnie commanded from behind Sherry's chair. You looked at her just fine when you were mocking her. Look at her now. Tommy forced his gaze upward. Sherry sat perfectly composed, her brown eyes steady and unflinching. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply looked at him with the calm of someone who'd already won this battle the moment he'd underestimated her. Before you apologize, Ronnie said, his voice carrying through the entire cafe. You're going to understand exactly who you tried to break. He moved to stand beside Sherry, one hand resting protectively on her shoulder. When he spoke again, his voice was different, still controlled, but edged with emotion that made it even more powerful. 3 years ago, we were at home. It was late, around midnight. We'd just finished dinner. We're watching a movie. Ronnie paused, his jaw tightening. The Rivera cartel wanted to send me a message. They wanted territory I'd taken from them. So they sent 15 armed men to our house. The cafe listened, transfixed. Even Tommy, kneeling on the floor, seemed unable to look away. They came through the doors, the windows, firing before we could even react. I grabbed Sherry, tried to get her to the safe room in the back. Ronnie's hand tightened on her shoulder, a gesture of both pain and pride. But they were too fast. Too many of them. I took a hit to the shoulder, not fatal, but enough to slow me down. I stumbled, fell. Sherry's eyes glistened, remembering that night with crystal clarity. The sound of breaking glass, the smell of gunpowder. Ronnie's blood on her hands. They had me, Ronnie continued, his voice rough. 2 of them, rifles aimed at my chest. Point blank. I was dead. Should have been dead. He looked down at Sherry, and his hardened expression cracked slightly, but she threw herself between us. Several customers gasped. The young waitress covered her mouth with both hands. She didn't hesitate, Ronnie said, his voice breaking slightly. Didn't think about herself, just moved, fast enough that the bullets meant for my heart hit her instead. He paused, his hand moving from her shoulder to gently touch her hair. 2 rounds, one through her lower spine, one shattered her left femur. The doctor said she shouldn't have survived the blood loss alone. Sherry reached up and placed her hand over Ronnie's, their fingers intertwining. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but everyone could hear the emotion beneath it. I wasn't going to let them take you from me, she said simply. Not then, not ever. She stayed conscious long enough to tell me where the panic button was, Ronnie continued. Long enough to save both our lives. My men arrived in 4 minutes. We held them off until then. His eyes hardened as he looked back at Tommy. She spent 6 months in the hospital. 3 major surgeries. Another year in physical therapy learning to live with paralysis. Pain that would have broken most people. Tommy's face had gone from gray to green. He looked like he might be sick. And through all of it, Ronnie said, his voice strengthening, she never complained. Never asked why me. Never showed weakness to our enemies or fear to the families who thought we were vulnerable. He looked directly at Tommy now. She became stronger, more dangerous, more respected than most men in my organization. Sherry's chin lifted slightly, pride evident in her posture. She had survived. She had adapted. She had refused to be defined by what she'd lost, choosing instead to be defined by what she'd protected. So when you mocked her wheelchair, Ronnie said, his voice dropping to something deadly. When you touched it without permission, when you invaded her space and tried to make her feel small, you weren't mocking disability. You were mocking courage, sacrifice, love that's stronger than bullets. The silence that followed was profound. Several customers were crying openly now. The elderly man in the corner had his arm around his wife, both of them looking at Sherry with something approaching reverence. Miguel, standing near the door, felt his own throat tighten. He'd heard the story before, but hearing the boss tell it publicly, with such raw emotion, drove home just how much Sherry Holmes meant to him, how far Ronnie would go to protect her. Ronnie looked down at Tommy, still kneeling on the floor. Now, knowing who she really is, knowing what she's survived, knowing what she sacrificed, apologized to my wife. Tommy's voice came out cracked and broken. Mrs. Holmes, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. About everything. You're incredible. I'm sorry. Sherry looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. I accept your apology, she said quietly. But you'll remember this moment for the rest of your life. Every time you see someone in a wheelchair, someone who looks vulnerable, you'll remember that you don't know their story. You don't know what they've survived. Yes, ma'am, Tommy whispered. Ronnie's expression remained hard. Your friends. They apologized too. The wiry thug and the shorter one with the scarred face exchanged terrified glances. They'd watched their leader, the man who'd always seemed invincible to them, the man who'd taught them how to intimidate and dominate, reduced to a trembling mess on his knees. Now it was their turn. Move, Ronnie commanded, his voice leaving no room for hesitation. They stumbled forward, nearly tripping over each other in their haste to comply. The wiry one dropped to his knees first, his thin frame shaking visibly. The shorter one followed, his scarred face twisted with fear and shame. Ronnie walked slowly around Sherry's wheelchair, positioning himself where he could see all three men kneeling before his wife. The image was powerful, three bullies who'd terrorized an entire cafe, now humbled, broken, forced to face the consequences of their cruelty. You, Ronnie said, pointing at the wiry one. What did you say to my wife? Repeat it. The man's voice came out as barely a whisper. I made jokes about her wheelchair, about how she got it. I said terrible things. Louder, Ronnie demanded. Everyone in this cafe heard you the first time. Let them hear you now. The wiry thug's voice cracked as he spoke louder. I mocked her disability. I made jokes about her body. I suggested she'd fallen off a stripper pole. I was cruel and disrespectful and wrong. Tears actually started rolling down his cheeks. Mrs. Holmes, I'm so sorry. I'm disgusting. I'm ashamed. Please forgive me. Sherry studied him with those calm brown eyes that had unnerved them from the beginning. She could see his fear was genuine, his shame real. But she also knew that fear alone wouldn't change him. Only understanding would. Do you have a mother? She asked quietly. The question caught him off guard. Yes, ma'am. Would you want someone to treat her the way you treated me today? His face crumpled completely. No. God, no, never. Then remember this feeling, Sherry said, her voice firm but not cruel. Remember how small you feel right now. And next time you see someone you think is vulnerable, remember that they're someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone's wife. They matter. Their dignity matters. Yes, ma'am, he whispered, his head bowing. I'll never forget, I swear. Ronnie turned to the shorter one with the scarred face. Your turn. This one was different. He'd been the most physically aggressive, the one who'd kicked Sherry's wheelchair, who'd tapped it disrespectfully with his knuckles. His apology needed to be more than words. I put my hands on your wheelchair, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I kicked it. I treated it like it was nothing, like it was just an object. But it's not. It's part of you. It's your mobility, your independence. It's how you move through the world. He looked directly at Sherry, and genuine remorse filled his eyes. I violated your space. I disrespected something intimate and personal. Mrs. Holmes, I am deeply, truly sorry. There's no excuse for what I did. Sherry felt something shift in her chest. This apology felt different, more aware, more conscious of the specific harm he'd caused. Her wheelchair wasn't just a chair. It was an extension of her body, something she relied on, something personal. Most people didn't understand that. But he did now. Apology accepted, she said softly. But understand something. When you touch someone's wheelchair without permission, when you move it or kick it or lean on it, you're touching them. You're violating their autonomy. You wouldn't grab someone's arm and move them around without asking. The same applies here. I understand now, he said, and she believed him. I'll never do it again. To anyone. Ronnie watched the exchange carefully, his expression still hard but perhaps fractionally softer. These men had learned something today. Whether that lesson lasted beyond their current fear remained to be seen, but at least the seed had been planted. The waitress, Ronnie said suddenly, his voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere. The young woman you terrorized when you walked in. Apologize to her. All three men turned toward the counter where the waitress stood, her eyes red from crying, her hands still trembling slightly. They rose from their kneeling positions. Ronnie hadn't given permission, but he didn't stop them either, and approached her slowly, carefully, like beaten dogs approaching their owner. Tommy spoke first, his voice hoarse. Miss, we treated you terribly. We were aggressive and disrespectful. We made you afraid in your own workplace. That's unacceptable. I'm sorry. The waitress looked at them, then passed them to where Sherry sat watching. Something in Sherry's calm, dignified presence gave her strength. She straightened slightly, finding her own voice. You made me feel unsafe, she said, her voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. You made me feel like I didn't matter, like I was just there to serve you and take your abuse. You ruined what's supposed to be a peaceful place for everyone here. You're right, the wiry one said. We did all of that, and we're sorry, truly. The waitress nodded slowly, accepting their apologies but not absolving them of guilt. She didn't owe them forgiveness, and she didn't give it. She simply acknowledged their words and turned away, reclaiming her dignity. Ronnie gestured toward the other customers, most of whom were still watching in stunned silence. Everyone else in this cafe. You frightened them. You ruined their afternoon. Apologize. The three men turned to face the room. Tommy cleared his throat, his voice carrying across the space that they'd dominated with such arrogance just minutes earlier. We're sorry, he said to everyone. We came in here acting like we owned the place. We were loud, disrespectful, and threatening. We made you all uncomfortable and afraid. That's not okay. We're sorry. A few people nodded. Others just stared. One older woman actually spoke up, her voice sharp with judgment. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Grown men acting like children, worse than children animals. Yes, ma'am, Tommy said, accepting the rebuke. We are ashamed. Ronnie let the moment hang for several seconds, watching the three men squirm under the collective gaze of everyone they'd wronged. Then he walked back to stand behind Sherry's wheelchair, his hands returning to the handles in that protective, possessive gesture. You're going to leave now, Ronnie said, his voice quiet but absolute. You're going to walk out of this cafe, and you're never coming back. You're going to stay out of this neighborhood entirely. If I hear you've caused trouble anywhere near here, if I hear you've disrespected anyone else the way you disrespected these people today, there won't be apologies or second chances. Do you understand? Yes, sir, all three said in unison. And one more thing, Ronnie added, his voice dropping even lower. You're going to pay for everyone's meal and coffee today. Every single person in this cafe. Consider it your penance. Tommy pulled out his wallet with shaking hands, walking to the counter and handing the waitress several large bills, far more than the total would have been. Keep the change, he mumbled. For you, for what we put you through. She took the money silently, her eyes still wary. Ronnie nodded toward the door. Now leave. Miguel will escort you out. The three men moved toward the exit, their earlier swagger completely gone. They walked like defeated soldiers, heads down, shoulders slumped. Miguel followed close behind them, his presence ensuring they wouldn't try anything stupid on their way out. As they reached the door, Tommy turned back one last time, looking at Sherry. Mrs. Holmes, thank you. For accepting our apologies. For teaching us something important. Sherry nodded once, regal and composed. Don't thank me. Just be better. They left, and the door closed behind them with a soft chime of the bell. The moment the door closed behind the three thugs, the tension in the cafe broke like a dam bursting. Customers exhaled audibly, some laughing nervously, others wiping tears from their eyes. The atmosphere shifted from fear and discomfort to something else. Relief, certainly, but also a strange kind of camaraderie. They'd all witnessed something profound together. Outside, Miguel stood on the sidewalk with Tommy, the wiry one, and the shorter one, his expression professional but cold. Two other men, Ronnie's soldiers who'd been positioned inside, had followed them out and now flanked the trio on either side. You got lucky today, Miguel said quietly, his voice carrying authority despite its low volume. The boss showed mercy because his wife asked him to through her actions. She accepted your apologies, So he let you walk out of there on your own legs. He paused, letting that sink in. But understand this, you're marked now. Not for death, but for observation. We'll know if you slip up. We'll know if you hurt someone else. And next time, Mrs. Holmes won't be there to show you grace. Tommy nodded frantically. We understand. We won't, we'll never. Save it. Miguel interrupted. I don't need your promises. I need your actions. Now get out of this neighborhood and don't come back. The three men scattered like roaches when the light turns on, practically running down the street to wherever they'd parked their motorcycles. Miguel watched them go, then pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Boss, they're gone. Sent them off with a warning and surveillance notice. They won't be trouble again. He listened for a moment. Yes, sir. I'll handle it. He hung up and turned to his two colleagues. Carlos, I want eyes on them for the next 2 weeks. Make sure they leave the neighborhood and stay gone. Any sign they're causing problems elsewhere, report directly to me. On it, Carlos said, already moving toward a black sedan parked down the street. Miguel and the other man, a younger soldier named Marcus, walked back into the cafe. The atmosphere inside had shifted dramatically. People were talking now, animated conversations breaking out at several tables. The elderly couple near the window was speaking with another patron, gesturing toward where Sherry still sat. The young waitress had regained her composure and was actually smiling as she refilled coffee cups. At the center of it all, Ronnie still stood behind Sherry's wheelchair, his hands on the handles, his presence protective and unmovable. But his expression had softened considerably. The deadly coldness was gone, replaced by something gentler as he looked down at his wife. Sherry reached up and placed her hands over his, squeezing gently. A private moment shared in public. The elderly woman who'd called the thugs animals stood up from her table and walked over to Sherry and Ronnie. She was small, maybe 5 feet tall, with white hair and kind eyes that had seen decades of life. She stopped in front of the wheelchair and looked up at Sherry with genuine warmth. My dear, she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. I want you to know that you are one of the strongest women I have ever seen. What you did today, how you handled those horrible men, it was remarkable. Sherry smiled, a real smile that lit up her face. Thank you. That means a lot. The woman reached out and gently touched Sherry's hand. I lost my husband 10 years ago. He was a good man, but I often wonder if he would have defended me the way your husband defended you today. She glanced up at Ronnie. You're a lucky woman, and you, sir, are a good man for loving her so fiercely. Ronnie's hard exterior cracked a little more. I'm the lucky one, ma'am. She saved my life. Defending her is the least I can do. The elderly woman nodded, patted Sherry's hand once more, then returned to her table. But her gesture opened a floodgate. Several other customers approached, not crowding, not overwhelming, but simply wanting to acknowledge what they'd witnessed. A middle-aged man in a business suit stopped by. Mrs. Holmes, I just wanted to say, you were incredibly brave. My sister uses a wheelchair, and she faces that kind of ignorance all the time. Thank you for standing up for yourself, for showing people that disability doesn't mean weakness. Thank you, Sherry said warmly. And tell your sister that she's not alone. We're stronger than people think. The young waitress finally approached, carrying a fresh cup of coffee. Her hands were steady now, her earlier fear completely gone. She set the cup down in front of Sherry, then looked at both her and Ronnie. This one's on the house, she said softly. Both of you. Everything. She paused, her eyes filling with tears again, but these were different tears. Thank you, for standing up to them, for making them apologize to me. No one's ever done that before. Sherry reached out and squeezed the young woman's hand. You deserve that apology. Don't ever let anyone make you feel less than you are. The waitress nodded, wiping her eyes, then returned to the counter with a genuine smile. Miguel approached Ronnie and spoke quietly. Boss, I've got Carlos tailing them. Marcus and I can stay if you want additional security, but I think the threat's neutralized. Ronnie glanced around the cafe, assessing. The atmosphere was peaceful now, almost celebratory. People were relaxed, talking, laughing. The darkness the thugs had brought had been completely dispelled. Go, Ronnie said. But stay within call range. I'm taking Sherry home soon. Yes, sir. Miguel nodded respectfully to Sherry. Ma'am, good to see you safe. Thank you, Miguel, Sherry said warmly. For always having my back. He smiled, a rare expression from the usually stoic lieutenant, and left with Marcus, the door chiming softly behind them. Alone, now as alone as they could be in a cafe full of people, Ronnie moved around to face Sherry. He crouched down in front of her wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level. His large hands covered hers, warm and strong. "Are you really okay?" he asked quietly, his voice intimate, meant only for her. Sherry looked into his eyes, those intense dark eyes that could be so cold and deadly but were now filled with concern and love. She smiled, a soft, genuine expression. "I am now," she said. "I knew you'd come." "Always," Ronnie promised, his voice rough with emotion. "You know I'll always come for you." "I know." She leaned forward slightly, and he met her halfway, pressing his forehead gently against hers. A moment of connection, of shared understanding that went beyond words. They stayed like that for several heartbeats, the cafe bustling around them but their world reduced to just the two of them. Finally, Ronnie pulled back and stood, his professional mask sliding back into place, though his eyes remained soft when looking at her. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "Actually," Sherry said with a small smile. "I'd like to finish my coffee first. It's good coffee. Shame to waste it." Ronnie actually laughed, a rare, genuine sound that made several nearby customers smile. "All right, we'll finish your coffee." He sat down across from her at the small table, his large frame looking almost comical in the delicate cafe chair. But he sat there anyway, present and attentive, watching her with eyes that held nothing but love and respect. An hour later, they were home. The penthouse apartment sat high above the city, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the skyline as the sun began its descent toward evening. The space was luxurious but surprisingly warm, not the cold, sterile bachelor pad one might expect from a crime boss, but a real home filled with comfortable furniture, art on the walls, and small personal touches that spoke of two people building a life together. Sherry wheeled herself toward the large windows, her movements practiced and graceful. She'd long ago mastered navigating their home, every inch of it designed with her accessibility in mind. Ronnie had made sure of that, ramps instead of steps, wide doorways, lowered countertops in the kitchen, a bathroom designed specifically for her needs. No expense had been spared. She stopped in front of the windows, looking out at the city below. Somewhere down there were the three men who'd learned a hard lesson today. Somewhere down there were hundreds of thousands of people living their lives, unaware of the drama that had unfolded in a small cafe. Ronnie came up behind her, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floor despite his size. He'd changed out of his suit jacket, now wearing just the fitted black shirt that showed off his muscular frame. His hands came to rest gently on her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. Sherry was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice was reflective. "I was thinking about how different today could have gone. If you hadn't come, if Miguel hadn't been there, if those men had been more dangerous, more willing to actually hurt me instead of just intimidate me." Ronnie's hands tightened on her shoulders, not painfully but protectively. "But I did come. Miguel was there. And you were never in real danger because you're never alone, Sherry. Even when you think you are, even when you want space, my people are always watching, always ready." "I know," she said, reaching up to place her hand over his. "And normally I'd find that suffocating, but after today, I'm grateful." He moved around to face her, crouching down like he had in the cafe so they were eye level. His expression was serious, vulnerable in a way he rarely showed even to her. "I was terrified," he admitted, his voice rough. "When Miguel called, when he said someone was touching you, crowding you, Sherry, I saw 3 years ago all over again. I saw you bleeding on our floor. I saw you in that hospital bed. I saw everything we almost lost." His jaw clenched. "I can't lose you. I won't survive it." Sherry felt her eyes sting with tears. Ronnie Holmes' feared crime boss, ruthless businessman, man who'd built an empire on intimidation and power, was kneeling before her admitting he couldn't survive without her. "You won't lose me," she said firmly, cupping his face with both hands. "Ronnie, listen to me. I'm not that easy to break. Those bullets didn't break me. This wheelchair didn't break me. And 3 idiot thugs in a cafe definitely didn't break me." She smiled, trying to lighten the heavy emotion. "I'm tougher than I look," he laughed, a sound caught between amusement and tears. "You're tougher than anyone I know. Tougher than most of my soldiers. Tougher than me, probably. Definitely tougher than you," she teased, and he laughed again, real and genuine. He stood up, but instead of moving away, he carefully lifted Sherry from her wheelchair, something he'd done thousands of times. Always gentle, always careful of her comfort. He carried her to the large couch by the windows and sat down with her cradled in his lap, her head resting against his chest. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The city below began to light up, windows glowing like thousands of stars. "You know what I thought today?" Sherry said eventually. "While those men were standing over me trying to make me afraid?" "What?" "I thought about how they saw me. They saw the wheelchair first. They saw disability, limitation, weakness. They made all these assumptions about who I am based on something they could see." She paused. "But they didn't see the fire. They didn't see the 3 years of fighting to reclaim my life. They didn't see the woman who took bullets and survived. And they definitely didn't see you coming." Ronnie's arms tightened around her. "They learned, though." "They did," Sherry agreed. "And maybe hopefully they'll think twice before judging someone else based on appearances. If they don't, they'll answer to me," Ronnie said, his voice hardening slightly. Sherry tilted her head to look up at him. "You can't protect the whole world from ignorance, Ronnie. You can't threaten every person who looks at someone in a wheelchair and makes assumptions." "I can try," he said stubbornly, and she laughed. "That's what I love about you," she said softly. "Your fierce, irrational, sometimes terrifying loyalty. You'd burn down the city for me if I asked." "Without hesitation," he confirmed, "without regret." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I know. And that's why I'd take those bullets again. Why I'd make the same choice every time, because loving you, being loved by you, is worth everything I've been through." Ronnie closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. When he opened them again, they glistened with unshed tears. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Yes, you do," Sherry said firmly. "You deserve love just as much as anyone else. You deserve someone who sees past the reputation, past the business, past the violence, to the man underneath, the man who treats me like a queen, the man who respects my strength while still wanting to protect me, the man who stood in that cafe today and made those thugs see me as a person, not a disability." They kissed then, soft and tender, a reaffirmation of everything they'd survived together and everything they would face in the future. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had fully set. The city was dark except for its thousands of lights, beautiful and alive with possibility. "You hungry?" Ronnie asked, practical even in emotional moments. Sherry laughed. "Starving, actually. That coffee was good, but it's not dinner. I'll order from that Italian place you like," he said, carefully lifting her again and carrying her to the dining table. As he placed her wheelchair beside the table and helped her settle into it, Sherry felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her, not just for Ronnie, though she was grateful for him every day, but for her life, complicated, difficult, sometimes dangerous, but hers. She'd survived, she'd adapted, she'd found love that was worth fighting for. Later, after dinner, they sat together on the balcony, a blanket wrapped around Sherry's shoulders as Ronnie stood behind her wheelchair, his hands on the handles in that familiar protective gesture. The city stretched out before them, infinite and full of stories. "You know what someone told me once?" Sherry said quietly. After the shooting, during physical therapy, one of the other patients, an older man who'd been paralyzed in a car accident. "What did he say?" "He said that most people see the wheelchair and think it defines us. They think it's the end of our story, the tragedy that overshadows everything else." She paused, looking out at the glittering city. "But he told me it's actually the beginning of a different story. A story about resilience, adaptation, finding new ways to be strong. A story that most people never get to tell." Ronnie leaned down and kissed the top of her head. "I like your story." "So do I," Sherry said, smiling. "Wheelchair and all, Mafia boss husband and all. Every complicated, dangerous, beautiful piece of it." They stayed there as the night deepened, two people bound by trauma, love, and unshakable loyalty. A queen and her king, strong in different ways but unbreakable together. And somewhere in the city below, 3 men were learning to see the world differently, their lesson learned at the hands of a woman in a wheelchair and the man who loved her enough to make them pay for their disrespect. Let the world misunderstand her, Sherry thought as she felt Ronnie's steady presence behind her. Let them see the chair and miss the fire. Let them make their assumptions. They would learn eventually. They always did. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.